Hello, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the final session of the Oxford Media Convention. I'm Jake Kanter, the International Editor at Deadline and the former chair of the UK's Broadcasting Press Guild. We are ending the convention with a panel on the future of Channel 4 in light of the government's now publicly stated desire to sell the 40-year-old broadcaster, renowned for hits including Big Brother, Countdown, and more recently, The Great British Bake Off. A 10-week consultation is underway, during which both sides of the debate will be considered. This is far from the first time that Channel 4's future has been examined in this way. In fact, it is the sixth time that the spectre of privatisation has been raised, with the last debate taking place just 5 years ago. Our session is titled The Great British Sell-Off: What's the Future for Channel 4's Public Service Programming? And joining me to answer that question is an esteemed panel who happen to know a thing or two about Channel 4 and the UK's revered public service broadcasting ecology. So in no particular order, I'd like to welcome our guests. If you're able to just give a little wave as I introduce you, that'd be great. First up, we have Andrew Griffith, the Conservative MP for Arundel and South Downs and former Sky Chief Operating Officer. Andrew sits on the DCMS's Public Service Broadcasting Advisory Panel, and so has the ear of ministers on this matter. He has spoken recently about the benefits of merging Channel 4 with another UK commercial broadcaster. Up next, Maggie Brown, a veteran media writer who has chronicled Channel 4's history in her new book, Channel 4: A History. Fraser Nelson is the editor of The Spectator and has been for the last decade, more than a decade, in fact. In 2016, Fraser presented a Channel 4 documentary on Britain's wealth gap. Up next, John McVay, Chief Executive of UK producer trade body PACT. For those who don't know, Channel 4 commissions all of its original shows from the UK's vibrant independent production sector. And last but not least, Baroness Jane Bonham-Carter, a former TV producer who now serves as the culture spokesperson for the Liberal Democrats. She is part of the Channel 4 all-parliamentary group that last week warned the government against privatisation without broad and robust evidence. Before I get into some questions, let's just remind ourselves of what Channel 4 broadcasts and stands for by taking a look at some of its work.
Are you ready?
Channel 4 exists to create change through entertainment. We're uniquely British, a public service broadcaster owned by and for the people.
No pressure.
We've always done things slightly differently.
Nice.
Channel 4 generates huge economic, cultural and social impacts across the UK at no cost to the taxpayer.
Yes!
Oh, that ended rather more quickly than I thought it would, but let's get into it. Let's get into the chat. I want to start you. So I want to ask you all to make some brief opening remarks. And here's the question that I'd like you to address. Culture Secretary Oliver Dowden has said privatising Channel 4 may well be better for the broadcaster and better for the country. Do you agree or disagree with that statement? Andrew, if you could start us off, please.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you. I agree with that statement. Channel 4 is my channel. I was 11 when it launched. I'm a conservative that likes Channel 4 News, and I could consume a disproportionate share of its content. But the UK broadcasting sector as a whole, that's part of our creative industry, is very fragmented. And I don't want the future for our broadcast sector that we saw with radio and print, which got left behind against the behemoths of the digital giants. Channel 4 is 90% funded from advertising. It's not even the fifth largest advertising sales point. It's not even the fourth largest streamer, and its linear audience is less than 6%. So we live in a very fragmented ecology, and we can continue to do that, but we'll end up in minnows threatening our creative sector. You've seen over the channel, M6 and TF1 try to consolidate. We already have 5 public service broadcasters, and we should separate ownership from remit. There are many, many bodies in the private sector that have a service obligation. The Royal Mail has a universal service obligation. British Telecom has an obligation to provide broadband services across the United Kingdom. So I contend we can have the best of all worlds. We can keep everything that we love about the output of Channel 4, its diversity and its creativity, but it can also play a part in restructuring the UK media landscape that protects everything we love about creative Britain and having a vibrant broadcasting sector. So I'll stop there, but I think we should conduct this debate very much in terms of the remit and the ownership, and we don't have to conflate the two of those.
Thanks, Andrew. Maggie.
Yes, I'm the person who's written two histories, in fact, of Channel 4 over the past 20 years and spent a lot of time thinking about it. I think Andrew has had a fantastic business career, but I think he's talking nonsense. I don't think Channel 4 is in the kind of precarious state that he believes it to be. I would take him back to the founder, who isn't actually Jeremy Isaacs. It was a person called Anthony Smith, who later became the master of Magdalen College. And Tony believed passionately in good institutions, institutions that will last and encapsulate values and go down through the generations, if possible. And he would include universities and other great British institutions alongside that, the National Trust, for example, the NHS. And I think that you're getting it all wrong, because Channel 4 has had 7 different chief executives. There is never an internal candidate. It refreshes itself with each new regime. It is extremely flexible. And I'll give you one very big example. You're talking about the streamers who are trampling apparently all over broadcasting, including British broadcasting. Well, Channel 4 in 2006 actually beat the BBC to doing 4OD, 4 on demand. It went further, and it was part of the doomed kangaroo proposal, which would have had an early Netflix, which I'm afraid John McVay, one of our panelists, actually complained about, and the Competition Commission stopped it. But the next regime came in and developed it and found a way of using data, audience data, in a most commercial manner while still supporting Channel 4. And now we have the current regime threatened with privatisation in 2015, but picking up from that and leading the march with a pivot towards digital development and advertising. And in my opinion, this is a very opportunistic and almost cruel way in which this privatisation has been sprung on us. And in addition, I do think that the 12-week consultation over the summer holidays, in the middle now of a new wave of pandemic, is totally cynical. And I don't believe that it should be taken any further forward.
Thank you, Maggie. Fraser, do you want to come in?
Yes, I'm not sure that privatisation is being sprung on us. Privatisation has been floated, I think 6-7 times in the past. And it's not easy, it's not hard to work out why. I mean, if Channel 4 doesn't say, it pays for its own bills, why is the taxpayer there at all? You need a pretty good reason, actually, for a company which covers its costs to be owned by the government. So I think it's perfectly natural if this question is asked afresh, especially in a television landscape that changes the whole time. Look at the way that Netflix has come along and just revolutionized what people thought they knew about the convention, about the potential for consumer revenue in the sector. So I think it's entirely appropriate that this question is asked now. I'd be remiss, to be honest, not to ask the question. And like Andrew Griffiths, I'm a great believer in not confusing things. I don't want to confuse ownership with a remit, as like him. But there's two things another thing that I'm very keen not to confuse. That is privatisation with competition. They don't always go together. I'm a great believer in competition. I don't know, Jenny might stand to correct me, but I would, in the great DNA of Channel 4, if you created it, I would put the late Sir Keith Joseph, who's set up the Centre for Policy Studies, which I'm a board member of. I would put him there too. And his remit was to create competition in fields like news, and that's important because if you were to have privatisation, I don't think that's a threat to Channel 4 at all. I've got no doubt that Channel 4 would flourish if it were privatised commercially. It would probably cut costs a little bit. It might, for example, merge with Channel 5. David Epstein reckons you could save 200 million quid if you did that. I don't think it's a commercial threat, but you've got to work out what the consequences of that would be. And I do not see much of the same future for the Channel 4 news that Andrew Griffiths says he's such a fan of. We all know that news costs shed loads of money. We all know the best way of making a privatised Channel 4 save a little bit more money is to cut down on things like an hour-long uninterrupted Channel 4 news session on 7 o'clock. Andrew would have his own viewing experience impaired quite a lot, I think, by privatisation. The same is true with the documentaries that Channel 4 does. I should declare an interest in having presented one of those documentaries, but that gave me, as a print journalist, a fascinating insight into how Channel 4 operates. I can't declare any financial interest. It cost me personally a fortune doing that Channel 4 dispatches because the cost of being on easily outstrips what remuneration us presenters get. But it let me see what an ecosystem of individual British companies that are creating this content. Again, for things like take Benefit Street, for example. That's a very a good, controversial, complete conversation-changing documentary that the BBC would never have done because basically it was too right-wing. That's not to say that Channel 4 is, I would place Channel 4 News to the left of the BBC. I'm sure Andrew would as well. Like him, I'm a great fan of it. I don't confuse quality with political leanings. But I do think that Channel 4's diversity would be impaired probably by privatisation. And I think that those on my side and the right who tend to believe that privatisation does lead to greater competition ought to bear in mind that it doesn't always. Privatise the railways, did that lead to greater competition? Not really. If you were to privatise Channel 4, might you end up with a new Channel 5 and less diversity where it really matters? So right now, I wouldn't say that I am necessarily all for or all against Channel 4 privatisation. I just think it needs to be thought through, and we need to think very carefully about whether the diversity which Keith Joseph sought to set up would be reinforced or undermined by independent ownership.
Thanks, Fraser. John, do you want to come in?
Yes, thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. Well, you see, you can't separate the remit from ownership. In fact, the government's own consultation links remit to potential ownership because it proposes changing Channel 4 status as a publisher broadcaster, so that whoever would in the future own it may be able to make and produce, own and control its own programmes. Currently, it is prohibited to do that under the remit. So I think it's disingenuous to say that they're not linked. They are fundamentally linked in the government's own consultation. Secondly, they also propose there may be some changes to what's called the terms of trade. The terms of trade are whereby independent producers, the 850 companies I represent, own and control the IP and the programmes they make for the 4 public service broadcasters. And of course, if I was the next owner of Channel 4, whoever that may be, if I'm allowed to make a certain percentage, let's say 50% of my own programmes for my own network, then I'm going to have to cancel slots that are available to smaller, more diverse companies across the UK, particularly from outside of London, who are my membership, who are most worried about this. Because often the first production you make might be for Channel 4. Now that may be Benefit Street, it may be a single one-off documentary with Fraser, but that is the way you get into a hermetically sealed UK broadcasting sector. By making a network show, once you've made that one documentary for Channel 4, you may then get a call from the BBC or even Netflix or someone else or Discovery or the Smithsonian Channel in America. You say, we really love that, that was great. So the only way I can make Channel 4 work as a new commercial owner is by cancelling those very slots, which are at the heart of Channel 4's diversity, the heart of the potential that Keith Joseph, Margaret Thatcher, and many others in the Conservative Party saw as its potential to open up a hermetically sealed broadcasting sector to everyone and anyone across this country who wanted to set up a business, take their chances, be entrepreneurs. And I thought that was a good Tory principle as well. So we're doubly shocked representing hundreds of free market entrepreneurs who have built global businesses on the back of the UK broadcasting sector, that one of the founding tenets of how we are able to compete, access a market and build successful British businesses is about to be thrown under a bus. And so we are very aggrieved that this government, who we thought would be much more supportive, particularly as we recover from the pandemic, I've just done an economic census of the independent sector, which was looking at a £3.3 billion turnover in 2019. We've lost £500 million in the pandemic as a result of the pandemic. We are still in recovery. Channel 4 is an important part of that for those small startup businesses in Bradford, in Leeds, in Belfast, in Manchester. Channel 4 is not only an actual market, but it's a potential market for future entrepreneurs to aim their opportunities at. And if that is removed, they will have nowhere else to go, because ITV won't commission them. It doesn't commission small companies from outside London. It makes all its own programs itself. BBC won't commission them because the BBC want you to have already made a program. So where's the opportunity for these new voices, these new entrepreneurs we need in British broadcasting in our public service sector? And if you sell off Channel 4, and as a condition of the sell-off, change the remit.
Thank you, John. And finally, Jane.
Before politics, I actually worked in television, and I worked for BBC, ITV and Channel 4. And I care deeply about public service broadcasting and about the symbiosis between public service broadcasting and something that hasn't actually been mentioned yet, which is our unbelievably successful, thriving creative sector. And Channel 4 is an absolute backbone to that, providing incredible opportunity within this country, but also exports, soft power. Channel 4, as has been, I think, alluded to, was created by Mrs. Thatcher and Willie Whitelaw, a model which has developed brilliantly over 40 years with no cost to the taxpayer, and provides, as if I can call you, Fraser, competition, as you say, to other PSBs. Something, of course, that Mrs. Thatcher wanted when this began, and it has continued to do. But also it is an unbelievable backbone to, as John alluded, small local production companies. And if I might say, Andrew, it's very much should be seen as very much part of levelling up, as well actually as Global Britain, because Channel 4 is, the programmes that Channel 4 makes are respected across the world, but equally on the levelling up front, it's the small local regional companies that I can tell you are supported and fed by Channel 4 and will go to the wall if Channel 4 is privatised, because whatever you say, it's not worth anything unless the remit has changed.
Okay, thank you all. I think we're really clear on your individual positions now. So let's just start, I think, by unpacking some of the official reasoning that the government has given for this. And if I can be succinct, the government's basically arguing that Channel 4 is unsustainable in its current form or in the future amid shrinking ad revenues and the streaming revolution. Maggie, is the advertising model for TV on its way to being broken?
Well, it clearly is an issue, and I don't deny that being 90% dependent on advertising is a particularly good place to be. But as I was explaining before, Channel 4 is well on the journey to both pivoting towards digital revenues, and in addition, it's very, very resourceful. I think that the problem with the current proposal is that, as Jane alluded to, Channel 4 is in the middle as well of transforming itself. It's looking to a new future, as it was directed to by the government, by Theresa May's government, in being more regionally diversified and having, if you like, support from businesses around the country. And that, I think, is really one of the key factors in it at the moment. It should provide longer term a different kind of audience, and indeed one that may well be very lucrative. It is still attracting and able to attract people to younger people to its programming, particularly now it has 24 million people who are signed up for its All4 portal, and a lot of those are younger people who are, of course, still very key to advertisers. And if you watch the channel, which I have to do kind of rather a lot, you'll see that it is innovative in the way that it is actually moving towards sponsorship and in a way going away from dependency on the 30-second advert. So one way that it could be helped, and I'm not saying Remit can't change at all. For example, one of the most interesting things about Channel 4 is that it in 2010 officially added Film 4 as one of the things it has to do. And it has actually managed not just to subsidize films, but actually make money out of some of them. I didn't know this until I asked the question, but it has made over 565 or contributed to 565 films since it was founded. So there are ways that it can help itself. And I wouldn't say that it shouldn't have a better share of the revenues that come from or the rights to the IP that are attached to programs it does actually pay for. In my new history, the one that you quoted from, which covers the past 15 years or so, I actually have the former chairman of Ofcom and his deputy talking about this very issue, about the way in which rights are given to or stay with the independent producer. And they both say that that particular settlement ought to have had a sunset clause in it, that there could have been maybe a reevaluation of the deal that might have, in a way, augmented Channel 4's income and reduced its very big dependency on advertising, which has grown, I agree, over the past decade. But I still don't think it makes Channel 4 vulnerable. This is my point. You are not looking at a failed organization. That is why everybody here is saying, well, is it necessary? And I would say that this is very much a project of a Conservative MP, John Whittingdale. And actually, I think there have only been 4 attempts to privatise it properly. And 3 of those he has been involved in. And I personally think that it is a terrible shame that this has been dumped on Channel 4 at this point in time when it's actually in the middle of a big reorganisation. And in addition, it's had to cope, like the other broadcasters, British broadcasters have had to do, with the huge disruption to production and the production pipe for programmes because of COVID. So,
Maggie, can I just bring in someone else? Sorry.
I think it needs time to actually regroup, and it should not be being subjected to this kind of rapid consultation.
Okay, thank you, Maggie. And so I think it's beyond argument that there is volatility in the advertising market, and it will come under increasing pressure in the future because of the streamers. John, you had your hand up through some of that answer. I mean, is there a way that Channel 4's model can be evolved that doesn't encroach upon the production sector and change its remit as a publisher broadcaster?
Well, the latest terms of trade, which are protected in legislation, we've negotiated with Channel 4 just last year, and Maggie may not have had a chance to catch up on this, basically give Channel 4 all the rights they require for no payment to use on their platforms in the UK. We only make money from those rights when we sell them internationally. Yep. So Channel 4, and I said this to Alex Mahan when we did the deal, and it was a very difficult deal to get over the line for both Channel 4 and my members. But I said to Alex Mahan, break a leg, you've got everything you need. And I think she's begun that journey, as Maggie says. They are building their new business model, able to use clips, programs going from All 4 to Channel 4 to E4, so they can build audience, they can build advertising. And look, if advertising was a bus model, then why are Facebook and Google using that to make their many hundreds of billions of pounds and dollars? It's not a bust model. The problem for the commercial broadcasters is too much advertising is migrated online. And if you were to consolidate the ad house sales in the UK, say Channel 4 and ITV, that may encourage the brands to take more of their money away from television and put it online if they felt they were being gouged because of a monopolistic practices in the advertising market, which was one of the reasons why Channel 4 was also founded to begin with, to bring competition to a monopoly commercial broadcasting sector. So I think there's a number of other things in the mix there. And I think Channel 4, given its cost per thousand, is very well placed to maximise the revenues from its audience going forward. But that's a matter for the executive to come up with plans that convince the board, us as suppliers, and the government as the owner. And I worry under these plans that basically this is asset stripping, not only of a publicly owned assets such as Channel 4, but asset stripping my private members' companies of their revenues that sustain skills, jobs, and innovation across the UK.
Andrew, do you want to come in? Because, I mean, you're in a slight minority on the panel. I wondered if you could talk a bit about how Channel 4 can be unleashed into production and do that safely in a way that does not damage a thriving part of our economy.
I don't think I'm in a minority, because I think we all have in common the desire for a thriving sector and protect the very best of what Channel 4 offers. I'm actually very supportive of John and his members, and I'd like to see the terms of trade continue. There are lots of different bodies. I talked about a couple of companies. Of course, we have Channel 5 and ITV, different remits, to be clear, but they do have a remit. They are regulated PSBs. No one is talking about the Wild West sort of anarcho-capitalism solutions. This will end up being a regulated, licensed broadcaster business. All we're talking about is effectively the shareholder layer, and there's many potential different consolidations of that. I completely disagree with John, just to be controversial. The idea that the ad market now in television is somehow monopolistic and fragmentation would be to aim it, would be to improve it, is just, I'm afraid, arrant nonsense. I mean, on that basis, you'd go back and split ITV back into all of its 12 individual franchises if you were under the deluded belief that that was going to help the ad market. The reality is we've got 3 tethered goats and 2 T-Rexes prowling around in Facebook and Google. They're wonderful commercial businesses. They do a great job for their advertisers. But one of the things that John would be talking about if we weren't talking about this today is how Channel 4 is spending less this year on PSB content. It slashed its programming budget because advertising revenues fell. And that just shows that although I think the management team are doing a magnificent job, and I don't shroud wave and think that Channel 4 is in short-term jeopardy, but the reason it's not is because it's a very simple business model. They take in advertising that they can get from a market which is not growing and will not grow, and then they spend what they can afford on public service content. And that amount that they can afford is shrinking. So for all the wonderful things it does, it is a shrinking pool. The fact that it's financially sustainable is just because it can cut its programming at the same rate as its revenues fall. Now, what I want is something that's just much more sustainable. You can have your levelling up agenda, you can have a remit to serve underrepresented communities, and you can have a terms of trade, but you can do so under potentially different ownership that has some other benefits as well.
You've argued in favour of merging Channel 4 with another UK commercial broadcaster. How do you see that working practically, and who do you think would be the best candidate?
Look, I mean, any of the other public service broadcasters, they're all heavily regulated. They all have remits. They all have quota hours in many of the same genres that Channel 4 do. And any of them could potentially represent a good owner. What I don't think it's fair to characterize this as asset stripping. On the one hand, Maggie implies it's not an asset. On the other hand, John implies the asset is his members, which of course supply to many other businesses. And many of the UK's production community don't get their break in Channel 4. Many do, but many of them also get their big break with Netflix, with Amazon, or with Sky in the past, which now commissions a much broader range of content, albeit on different terms of trade. So we're just not operating in this very black and white binary model. And any transfer, and this is a consultation paper, and one of the topics for consultation is precisely what that remit should be. I don't think there's any predetermination in terms of that remit. There is a indicated direction of travel on ownership, but not in terms of what that remit could potentially be. And therefore, everybody will pile in, I'm sure, as they will today, into that consultation.
Jane, I mean, we're talking about a bit about consolidation here in the UK between some of the public service broadcasters. Andrew's clearly a proponent of that, but we've also seen the government talk about how Channel 5 has thrived under the ownership of Viacom CBS, which is a monolithic US media company. Do you think the best way to protect Channel 4 from a giant American company is to sell it to a giant American company?
You're talking to me?
Yes.
Yeah. No, and I really want to ask Andrew why he thinks without a massive change to the remit, anyone was going to want to buy Channel 4. But anyway, that's a different question. No, I mean Channel 5, is a good channel under Viacom. I think it's an improved channel. But the fact is it spends a minute amount compared with Channel 4 on British content, let alone British content, and it's just asked Ofcom to allow it to reduce its news output. And, you know, it will be drip, Andrew. You know, whatever happens initially, I can assure you it will be drip. And you say, and I believe you support what Channel 4 is doing out in the regions, what Channel 4 News is doing, and so on. But it will be, there is no way that a commercial buyer is not going to erode the remit.
Fraser, I mean, we're talking about the official reasons here, but I wonder what Tories are whispering in corridors about Channel 4. I mean, clearly there is a view within the TV industry that, and some speculation from sources close to Channel 4, that it's a victim of culture wars and the government is keen to show that it's cracking down on the broadcasters' perceived woke values. Are there any ulterior motives here?
I don't think quite in the way that you suggest. I think that, again, I come back to my point about the idea that Channel 4 ought not to be owned by the taxpayer is not hardly a radical or out there proposition. Its current ownership status is the anomaly. And that should be, it's natural to me that this is looked at every so often to work out whether it's right. Now, there is a sort of institutional problem, I think, in that a lot of people are basically suspect malign motives of conservatives, imagine that they're sort of sharpening their right-wing knives over here to carve up anything they regard as left-wing. This is a great massive revenge for Dorothy Burns and Bookham Boris. Or there's all those kind of theories that go on about why the Tories might want to do this. And I think that they're largely misplaced. I mean, you right now, when you look at the BBC, there are huge questions to be asked about its ownership and structure in a market that changes so much. I don't think there's a big media company in the country which is not looking at whether it should necessarily own all of the assets, but it does, whether it might dispose some, it might merge others. I mean, Sky's ownership changed. That's why we're thereby releasing Andrew Griffith to join us in Parliament. And so that thing's changing all the time. Now, it certainly is a perception amongst the Conservatives that Channel 4 News is to the left of the BBC, and therefore, what's the point in that? And that if there's also, I think there is a lazy assumption, I wouldn't put this on behalf of government, that if it were independence, an independent broadcaster with a closer relationship with its readers, a closer relationship with its viewers, and that a closer relationship with the people who pay the salary tends to lead to different discussions, not being so institutionally biased as the BBC is. And perhaps might become a little bit more like, I don't know, like talk radio or LBC or stuff like that. But I think when you look at the market, that's often a misconception. I can't, for example, if you look at Netflix, I can't see Netflix making any of the more risque stuff that Channel 4 has made. If you look at Sky News, I don't think you can really claim that Sky News is to the right of the BBC. I don't, as a former Sky director, Andrew might have a clearer idea than me. But I don't think it's wrong to think that this is some kind of culture war and this is some kind of revenge on Channel 4 News or that. I mean, it's simply a matter of good housekeeping. Although there is an element of that, there's always an element of that. But the recent emergence of what you might call the woke corporation, corporate activism, I think challenges the idea that any independent company is necessarily going to be to the right of anything owned by the government. I actually think that the reverse is true. And I think that Channel 4's, certainly the documentary that I did, if you look at I think Channel 4 wants to do a documentary called The Great Global Warming Swindle, challenging the whole notion of established climate science. Now, the BBC would never make that documentary in a million years. It would never do something that so challenges the conventional orthodoxy. Of course, Channel 4 paid the price for that in terms of zillions of complaints. They probably got hauled up by one of these broadcasting star chambers for asking the wrong kinds of questions. But to me, that is a kind of diversity. The iconoclasm of Channel 4, I just think that's one of its major characteristics. That iconoclasm, to me, is protected by the current model of state ownership. I think that a independent stroke privatized Channel 4 would simply be more risk averse and would simply join there's no shortage of competition generally in drama and other parts of broadcasting. So I think it would become less different, less unique, and offer less choice. So I think if there are Tories out there who think we're going to cut them adrift, and by the way, you can always have a little license to say we're going to privatize Channel 4 on the condition that, for example, they keep the news 1 hour long and without any adverts. Now you might do that, but a Channel 4 which is more dependent on money might think, well, we know how to get more ratings for Channel 4 News. We stop leading Channel 4 News on the more kind of serious, discursive, in-depth topics. I mean, Channel 4 News is not out there for ratings. If it was, it would lead on very different stories every night. So that is, one of the consequences. You get there is a definite tension here between diversity of output and commercialization. And I think we can just look around the media in America and we can see that point. The obvious, I reckon the obvious road for Channel 4 to go down would be a kind of MSNBC kind of route if it were privatized. So if there are Tories thinking that, I think those concerns are misplaced. But I really would caution against the many people in the industry, not many of whom are sympathetic to the Conservatives, in thinking that this is all one big deranged Tory plot to punish Channel 4. There are very, very good questions to be asked here, and there are very good answers to those questions. To be honest, as somebody who's quite sympathetic towards Channel 4, I'm quite struck at how often Channel 4 struggles to answer that fairly basic question: why should we be owned by the government?
Just briefly, Fraser, do you think this is a fait accompli? Do you think this is going to happen, or do you think that there is room for those who are against privatisation to win this argument?
Certainly, those I speak to in government regard it as a fait accompli. And it tends to be quite a short discussion. This is going to happen, box ticked. Now, that doesn't mean to say it is. This time last week, the idea that the government would impose a new national insurance tax to pay for social care, that was a fait accompli. That was absolutely going to happen this week until it didn't. So this is a government, I'm afraid to say, that can change it to basically can make big decisions without properly thinking them through, which is why I think this consultation process is really important for Channel 4, in my view, to wake up and start making some of these diversity arguments, which it hasn't been doing. It's the first thing I would do if I was Channel 4. I think there is certainly an argument still there to be won, but right now, I certainly what I pick up in government is that a lot of people think, look, let's just do this. David Cameron didn't manage to get around to the BBC, so let's manage to do Channel 4. I think there is not nearly as much thought going into this process as I would like. I'm afraid to say, though, that's true for quite a lot of things the government is doing right now. There's not a lot of thought going into a discriminatory effect of vaccine passports, not a lot of thought going into how this new social care plan would add extra capacity. It's a bit of a trend right now. This is a pandemic still. People are still, the government is still feels it as an emergency measures. And as a result, things that ought to be given thought and debate are not being given thought and debate. But if Channel 4 cannot insert thought and debate in this conversation, then I'm not quite sure what Channel 4 is there for. If Channel 4 can't do this, who can?
Yeah.
Can I just push back a tiny bit on the point about thought? Not more generally, but I think there is an exceptional amount of really deep thought in this space. Ofcom themselves have just concluding a PSB review. The government did not knee-jerk into this. They'd set up a public service broadcasting advisory panel that all parts of the industry are represented on. John Whittingdale himself is probably one of the longest serving broadcast ministers in multiple different governments. DCMS spend a lot of time on this. So,
Andrew, just to chip in now, and I read the Ofcom PSB review document this week. At no point in it, and at no point in that document does it say we need to fundamentally review the future of Channel 4 because it's not a sustainable business. And I don't know, we don't know what's going on behind closed doors in the advisory group. Perhaps you can cast some light. Is this a recommendation that you have made to the government that Channel 4 be privatised?
Well, we're going through a consultation process. I mean, people can't have it both ways. I mean, either there's predetermination, which would be wrong, and I don't think it's right, or or there's a large-scale consultation in which John, all of John's members, I'm sure all of the panel can participate. This morning we had a debate in Parliament on precisely this issue. So there's a great deal of consultation, but there's also a great deal of thought. And it would be far less thinking if in 40 years, you know, a state-owned asset didn't from time to time, just like every other part of the state, come around for review. That's a perfectly appropriate exercise and endeavour, and that's why you have a consultation. No one's just announced a foregone conclusion on this at all.
Jane, did you want to come in?
Behind closed doors was the interesting point. Your committee meets behind closed doors, which is bizarre, and I don't understand. Also, why is there not going to be any impact assessment and costings made before this consultation ends? And also, picking up on Maggie's point, it's happening over recess at the sort of tail end of a, well, not, I hope the tail end, maybe not, of a pandemic.
John.
Yeah, I just wanted to pick up, I think, on the very clear commercial logic of Fraser in terms of it's the unintended consequences of moving its ownership to a more commercial owner. Whether Andrew and John can actually try and protect the current remit, we'll wait and see, but I tend to agree with Jane, it will be eroded on day two, because that's what ITV have been doing for the past 15 years, and it's what Channel 5 are currently doing. But the commercial logic would still mean that many of the small companies around the UK would not be attractive to the new commercial owner. They wouldn't be commissioned in much the same way that ITV currently doesn't commission small companies around the UK out of London. It commissions itself to make its own programmes out of London. Small factual producers, I say, don't even go and knock on Kevin Lygo's door at ITV, because unless you've got Joanna Lumley sailing down the Rhine in a barge drinking champagne, you ain't going to get a gig. If you want to do something about child sex abuse in Rochdale, you go to Channel 4. You might go to the BBC, but if you were taking a contrary view to the more established views of the BBC, Channel 4 would be the only place you could take that. And we would lose that. Whatever happens, we will lose that. And I think the government needs to wake up to the brutal commercial logic of commercial owners in that respect. They will not talk to my small startups who might have a brilliant idea, great access, but they won't get a gig. And they will not succeed because other people, Netflix, won't commission them. Sky won't commission them. You won't be commissioned by Sky or Netflix unless you've already made a program. They're not taking a risk with all their hard-earned subscribers' money on people who haven't made a program. Channel 4 is not only an actual value in the market for everyone who's thinking about it going in future generations, it's an opportunity where the door would be closed.
John Whittingdale was speaking this morning as part of the Westminster Hall debate on this issue, and he was saying, quite apart from the remit being eroded, the remit is actually going to be strengthened by the government throughout this process. Do you expect that to happen, and if so, where? John, do you want to just say something briefly on that?
Andrew, do you want to come in? Right, okay. Right, the 2003 Communications Act was quite rightly giving our public service broadcasters more latitude in the remit. It didn't have the old ITC prescriptive, you must do X hours of religion and Y hours of arts. It was a much more open and flexible model. And in fact, under Ofcom's own recent statements, it will become more flexible, where Ofcom will judge after the fact whether you're PSB or not. So I don't see how you can write into the new ownership that the new owner will have to commission someone from Bradford who's got a documentary about child sex abuse in Bradford. You can't, that's impossible. And also government shouldn't really be getting into writing who you commission or what you commission at all with our public service broadcasters. I think that's a very dangerous slope from whatever political spectrum you may come from. So I don't see how you protect those opportunities. I just can't see it under new commercial ownership. And I think it will deny different voices, new voices, their opportunity. And I think that's a tragedy.
Andrew, how do you strengthen the remit under commercial ownership?
I'm continually surprised by John just talking down his members. I mean, we have a vibrant sector. You know, we succeed in so many different domains where we don't have to enshrine the remit. I support enshrining the remit, and I think if any legislation comes forward, there's a great opportunity to sharpen that up and bake in things that are already happening, but give them statutory protection. But I just don't buy the idea that without this particular exact moment in time form of intervention, one that, by the way, has reduced the incomes of John's members because of that reliance singularly on advertising revenue, that we're not going to continue to have a vibrant, successful, creative sector in the UK. I just don't buy that. And I think that analysis has to move on a little bit, because why is it that Netflix are building studios here? Why is it that the UK is one of the most successful hunting grounds for Amazon Prime? Why do we have some of the world's most successful indies, freelancers, creative industries? You know, these are all core strengths of our business, and I think they're more resilient than a particular moment in time funding model, which itself is declining. If we do nothing, the do nothing option here is the one that is not a true friend of Channel 4. It is not a true friend of the creative industries in the UK.
Maggie, do you just want to come in a bit? And then I'm going to just move the discussion a little bit towards Channel 4 News and Channel 4's wider cultural impact. We are very quickly running out of time. So Maggie, do you just want to quickly make a remark?
Yes, well, I just think that Andrew's argument is incorrect. We want both in this country. It's perfectly possible that we can be feeding Netflix and international audiences from our very strong base, while also having a very interesting, quirky, different, I know it's peculiar and it's odd and it doesn't fit nicely into any kind of framework, but we have Channel 4. It does do things. John has spoken about some of the programming that it focuses on, the abuse of young girls by Asians, the kind of forced marriages that it's exposed, all sorts of trafficking that it actually uncovers. We can surely have both. I don't see what is wrong with a small broadcaster that valiantly manages somehow to go on adapting and actually still contain a lot of very good people commissioning programs who then go back into the production sector full of the understanding of the other side of the fence, and also then themselves can, if you like, go on to international fame. It's part of an ecology, and just because it's small doesn't mean that it's in decline. As I argued at the beginning, it is a flexible model, and I think that the problem now, frankly, is that the Conservative government has a very big majority, and that is tempting it to actually act in a not very conservative way. A real conservative, Andrew, would be concerned about preserving the best of the British institutions that we have. I'm not saying don't change it in any way, but it should be nurturing a public asset and not just throwing it away because you have the majority and you are able to do so.
Okay, let's just take a moment and reflect on some of Channel 4 News's output over the last few years. I think we've got a clip, and maybe then we can ask one or two questions.
Good evening. Tonight, two major and deeply significant investigations on Channel 4 News.
Last night, a senior ExxonMobil lobbyist revealed how he reels in senators like fish to do the company's bidding.
We had a friend who happened to be chair of a very powerful committee who was able to step in front of this, what we call the runaway train. Yeah. And was able to use a political maneuver to slow it down.
You saw the Exxon executive on Channel 4 News last night. What's your reaction to what he was saying?
It's shameful. Their gilded world now lies in ruins.
We raise new questions about what Epstein and Maxwell did here in the UK.
And there's been the Trump years. A huge
which
amount.
Some people in that room think you were part of. President Biden thought you were his clone.
Is it one rule for you, Mr. Cummings, and another rule for everybody else?
No. Told by 3 who've survived the virus, mourning 3 killed by it in the space of just 5 days.
His wife and his 2 sons.
My family. Just devastated.
As they lie in intensive care, as some of them near the end, their families can't be with them, hold their hands, tell them they love them. So this nurse does it for them.
They're preparing the coffin, but today the sheets are in the smallest of sizes. For the body they will shroud is a schoolboy aged just 10.
Down syndrome doesn't define me, but it does affect my rights. And people like me are facing a fight for our right to exist. Why would anyone want to screen people like me out of existence?
There are thousands and thousands of people, young people, who are here today. There's much anger about what's happening in the US as there is here in the UK.
Vote Leave, saying that is not fact checking. Ban tea kettles. You led Vote Leave. There are now people from Vote Leave involved in the Conservative election campaign.
Of course there are.
Is this a lie?
The police are moving in behind me, as you can see, slowly trying to push the protesters back.
It's taken us several hours to get here to Chateau Belair. The conditions, as you can see, are really difficult.
The discovery of 6-year-old Susie was hailed like a miracle. She'd been buried under rubble for 7 hours.
Sadiqa Mahmoudi is badly burnt. Her ambition reflects the Afghanistan she has known in her 18 years. She wants to be a journalist.
Okay, so we've got about 5 minutes left. I just want to ask 2 more questions, and I'm going to open up to the audience briefly. Fraser, we've just had a taste there of Channel 4 News. I mean, how important is Channel 4 News to the UK's media plurality?
Well, I mean, in a UK media where the BBC is, I know what proportion of the UK media, it goes from one company. Any diversity is incredibly important, is incredibly necessary. It continues to, I think, be a real cause of concern for me, just how much of the market the BBC hoovers up. The BBC is now the number one player in the written word, not just the broadcast word via its website. And the way that the BBC has uniquely got this ability to prosecute its customers or even its non-customers, I think raises real concerns about its power. So any challenge to that power, I think, is welcome. Now, you know, if you look at that's not to say that I think Channel 4 News is necessarily a huge counterbalance to the BBC. It's more of a tonal difference, but the fact that there's a difference at all is important and worth protecting. Also worth protecting in that we all, you know, when Sky was bought, the first question was, will Sky News survive? Everybody knows that news is not a money spinner, that news exists in a sort of very fragile economic ecosystem. That's why I think lots of people want GB News to succeed. The idea of diversity in this market is something that everybody wants. And it's rather difficult to pull off, given that the technological feats and the amount of money that you need. So, of course, I would say it is very important. I personally think there's a lot more room for differentiation with the BBC than Channel 4 News takes right now. But I think it's a very high quality programme, and it's one that, like Andrew Griffiths, I've always been a big fan of.
Okay, thanks, Fraser. Just to take a step back a little and consider sort of Channel 4's wider cultural impact. I mean, we've heard throughout this session about the work that Channel 4 does in the nations and regions, working with local production companies. And Jane, I wanted to ask you, do you think that privatising Channel 4 fits with the government's levelling up agenda?
Well, I don't. And if I have time, I might amuse Andrew by the fact that Robbie Gibb, I used to edit something called A Week in Politics for Channel 4. And Robbie once said to me that was his inspiration as a political programme. So there we go. No, I don't think it does. And I don't think it does actually because of what John has said earlier about the small, and I've said also, about the small regional and production companies that feed into our massively successful creative industries. Ultimately, they don't all start out as hugely successful companies that American behemoths want to buy. They need to be helped. And the fact that Channel 4 is here means that throughout Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland and England, small regional companies are being encouraged and they grow.
Okay, and just there's an audience question which kind of follows on from that. And Sylvia Harvey asks, what are some of the new red wall and blue wall MPs saying about privatised Channel 4? Do we have any insight on this, panel? No. Okay, we'll go to another question from the audience, which is from Patrick Barwise, and it's for you, Andrew. He asks, if the aim is to combine Channel 4's sales operation with ITV's or Sky's to compete against the likes of Facebook and Google, why can't you just do that without privatising Channel 4?
Yeah, look, in theory you can. The counterfactual is it has not happened. There's a very expensive advertising sales team sitting within Channel 4, a large part of which has been based in London. That's happened throughout ad cycles. So downturns in the ad cycles haven't provoked consolidation. And so you should ask Channel 4's management, why they haven't been able to participate more in that.
And Maggie,
it's not for the lack of conversations. The CMA historically has defined only one TV advertising market, which may have been an impediment in the past. But I think it's very, very hard to ignore the very significant market shares taken now by Facebook and Google of the overall advertising market. And I think that if they were to look at it again, one would look at it through the lens of a single video advertising market.
Well, they may do. Yes, I agree. But
sorry, Maggie, we're so close to the wire on this. I apologise for cutting you up. I just wanted to ask one final question of you, Maggie, actually. So yes. I will give you an opportunity to speak, but we've seen Charles Garassa write a letter to the Secretary of State yesterday, fairly blistering in his appraisal of the government's approach to this process. How do you see Channel 4's input into this debate playing out over the next few weeks?
Well, Channel 4 and certainly Garassa is exiting as chairman. The people who are the board are obviously going to oppose this fiercely for the reasons that I have expressed before. They have just been through a lot of the mill with the government, with Theresa May's government. The questions really remain the same, and it was rejected. And I can't, for the life of me, see why a Channel 4 board would want to go down without fighting very hard for the independence of Channel 4 and the existence of Channel 4 as it is formulated now, as a great public asset, a great British invention.
Jane, just briefly, do you want to make
very
some
briefly?
final remarks?
I just think in the week that we're going to the Olympics, I mean, the Paralympics would not be covered and supported across the world now if it wasn't for Channel 4.
Okay. I think that's all we have time for. So we could talk endlessly about this, I'm sure, but I really appreciate you guys taking part in this discussion and for your time and your thoughts. So just once again, thank you to our panelists, Andrew Griffith, Maggie Brown, Fraser Nelson, John McVay, and Baroness Bonham-Carter.